George Washington, the man whose name would one day stand at the very foundation of a nation, began his journey in 1732 on a Virginia plantation overlooking the rolling tides of the Potomac River. Born into a world shaped by tobacco fields, colonial struggles, the echoes of the old world, and the uncertain, rising heartbeat of a new world that had not yet decided what it wanted to become, and as he grew amidst the rustic rhythms of plantation life, the early death of his father carved a line across his childhood, pushing him into adulthood far sooner than any boy deserved, forcing him to learn discipline, responsibility, and self-control before he even understood the meaning of destiny. And while other boys spent their days in carefree games, young Washington was already measuring lands, studying the wilderness, walking through dense forests, and learning to survive in spaces untouched by civilization. A journey that turned him into a skilled surveyor whose boots crossed rivers, valleys, and mountains, and whose maps drew the first rough outlines of lands America had not yet claimed. Through these rugged years, Washington's character hardened like steel, quiet, serious, ambitious, and observant traits that made him stand apart in a world where most men dreamed small and lived smaller. But Washington looked beyond the horizon, believing that life had something larger written for him. And when the French and Indian War erupted, the young Virginian stepped onto the battlefield as a British colonial officer, eager to prove his worth, unaware that this brutal conflict would scar him, shape him, and ultimately prepare him for the greatest challenge in the continent's history. He faced defeat, ambush, bloodshed, and near death countless times. Learning through devastation what true leadership demanded: courage in the face of chaos, calm under fire, and the resilience to rise again when everything collapsed. And though he was criticized, doubted, and sometimes overlooked, he slowly built a reputation for bravery and integrity that spread across the colonies. And as the political winds shifted, Washington watched the British crown tighten its grip on the American colonies through taxes, acts, restrictions, and humiliating policies designed to keep Americans dependent and powerless. And with every oppressive law, Washington's patience thinned and his belief in British fairness dissolved, until he joined the growing chorus of voices that demanded rights, dignity, and representation, a chorus that soon turned into the call for rebellion. And when the drums of revolution thundered in 1775, the Continental Congress looked across all 13 colonies and found only one man whom all factions trusted: a soldier with experience, a gentleman with dignity, a leader without arrogance, George Washington, who accepted the command of the Continental Army not out of ambition, but out of duty, knowing full well that he was stepping into a war where America had no money, no navy, no trained soldiers, no supplies, no winter clothing, and no guarantee of survival. And yet, through freezing nights, starvation, disease, mutiny, political pressure, betrayal, and unending defeats, Washington held the scattered army together by sheer force of will, especially during the nightmare winter at Valley Forge, where soldiers wrapped their bleeding feet in rags and starvation hollowed their faces. And still, Washington walked among them, encouraging them, promising them that freedom required sacrifice, and proving through his presence that leadership meant suffering with your men, not commanding from comfort. And when all hope seemed lost, Washington executed the bold, legendary Christmas night crossing of the Delaware River in 1776. Marching his exhausted troops through wind, snow, and ice to strike the enemy at Trenton, delivering a victory so shocking, so miraculous, that it revived the spirit of an entire revolution, convincing the world that America would not die quietly. Battle after battle, Washington adapted, retreated when needed, attacked when least expected, outsmarted larger armies with limited resources, applied patience where others demanded recklessness. And with every decision proved that true strategy was not measured by glory, but by survival. And finally, in 1781, the moment came when Washington joined forces with the French Navy to trap British General Cornwallis at Yorktown, forcing a surrender that echoed across oceans and signaled the dawn of a new nation. And when the war ended, Washington stood at the apex of power, admired, trusted, practically worshipped, yet, instead of taking the throne, instead of becoming king or dictator or supreme ruler as history's greatest generals often did, he shocked the world by resigning and returning to his farm at Mount Vernon, choosing humility over power and proving that greatness lies not in domination, but in restraint. But fate was not finished with him, for the weak Articles of Confederation plunged the nation into chaos, economic collapse, political infighting, and near anarchy forced the leaders of each state to gather and craft a new constitution. And Washington's presence at the Constitutional Convention became the anchor that held the entire process together, giving the emerging government legitimacy, stability, and unity. And when the Constitution was completed, the American people turned unanimously once again to the only man they trusted with their fragile experimental acting. George Washington as the first President of the United States, and in office he shaped the very DNA of American government. Rejecting royal titles, setting ethical standards, building the national financial system through Alexander Hamilton, establishing the judiciary, creating foundations for foreign policy, and teaching future leaders that the presidency was not a throne but a temporary stewardship. He governed with dignity, balancing firmness and fairness, navigating internal divisions, and maintaining peace in a world threatened by European empires. And after 2 terms, despite immense pressure to stay, he stepped down voluntarily, creating the tradition of peaceful transfer of power that would define American democracy. And in his final years at Mount Vernon, Washington lived simply, overseeing his farm, caring for his estate, quietly guiding the nation through letters, and reflecting on a life that had transformed a collection of colonies into a united republic, until his death in 1799, when the world mourned the passing of a leader unlike any before him, a man of discipline, character, sacrifice, humility, courage, and unwavering dedication. remembered not as a conqueror but as the founder whose strength shaped a nation, whose restraint preserved its freedom, and whose legacy became the unshakable foundation of the United States of America.